Tonight on Brian Ross Investigates, chaos in Iowa, an election laughingstock.
It has not gone as planned.
The only results from the Iowa caucus at this hour are chaos and confusion.
Chaos, confusion, meltdown. Pick your adjective to describe Iowa caucuses. What a mess. This is not the finish that anyone expected.
Is the 2020 election already marred by uncertainty about the vote count?
As chair of the party, I apologize deeply for this.
Plus, that deadly virus spreading far and wide beyond China.
We're shadowboxing. We need to bring this virus out into the light so we can attack it properly.
And our shout out for the reporter in Chicago whose stories exposed how and why tens of thousands of people had to file bankruptcy over unpaid parking tickets.
This is way more than just about ticket debt. This is about restoring people's dignity.
From the Law&Crime Network studios in New York City's Herald Square, this is Brian Ross Investigates. Good evening and welcome. And we begin tonight with the chaos in Iowa, where the first votes for the 2020 election were cast this week. The chair of the Democratic National Committee now calling on Iowa to conduct a complete re-canvass of the vote after a still unexplained series of snafus that left the votes there still not fully counted. A huge embarrassment and an election laughingstock.
This state had one job. They had one job, and they blew it at the most important time in the election.
The only results from the Iowa caucus at this hour are chaos and confusion. Never good. Here are the numbers, as we said, right now.
There they are.
A lot of zeros.
What a mess. This is not the finish that anyone expected.
This is a really major screw up.
It snowballed into just what was the biggest political catastrophe Iowa has seen in a long time.
Several issues with a new app where results were to be inputted, login trouble, reporting confusion.
Even before last night's meltdown, people were worried about relying on this app, right? But the head of Iowa's Democratic Party was like, don't worry, baby, we got this.
The day before the caucus, we asked State Party Chairman Troy Price if he had any fear about tech glitches or other problems.
Do you have a nightmare scenario, and if so, what do you do about it?
These are probably the most prepared we've ever been as a party for these caucuses. We've run through a few different scenarios, but I can tell you we're ready.
This is the most prepared you've ever been as a party?
So far, it seems more like a case of incompetence than Russian or foreign hackers. But even so, it adds to the already high anxiety over whether Americans can trust the outcome of the coming election, with the head of the FBI warning this week that Russia and other nations are continuing to interfere in the election process. Joining us to talk about this are two people who know a lot about the issue. At Georgetown University, Professor Ben Buchanan, author of a new book that comes out later this month, The Hacker and the State. And from Harvard, Maria Barsayo Lynch, the executive director of the Defending Digital Democracy Project at the Belfer Center for Science and International at Harvard's Kennedy School. Ms. Lynch, let me start with you. What were your thoughts in those first hours Tuesday evening when the Iowa results seemed to have disappeared?
Well, Brian, I was thinking about the Iowa Democratic Party because as part of our work with the Defending Digital Democracy Project, we worked with the Iowa Democratic Party and the Republican Party of Iowa this fall to conduct a bipartisan simulation exercise to help the parties think about different threats that they might face, cyber threats, operational threats, information attacks. And it was a great show of effort in the sense that, some of these issues are not bipartisan issues, and I think the parties took that preparation process successfully. So seeing what was happening made me sad for them in the sense that I know they had the best of intentions in their preparations.
Ben Buchanan at Georgetown, when you saw what was happening, was your first thought maybe the Russians are at it again?
Well, there's an old saying, never ascribe to malice what you can ascribe to incompetence. So I was betting on incompetence early, but I'd be lying if I said Russia didn't cross my mind and cross my mind quickly. I think for a variety of reasons, it would make sense for Russia to be aggressive this time around. And certainly with something as high profile as the Iowa caucuses, nothing is more important than election integrity and cybersecurity. So it stands to reason Russia would want to interfere here and elsewhere. We should expect, I think, an active environment this year. So yes, Russia was on my mind from the start.
And is there a high anxiety about that?
I think a lot of people feel like the Russian activity in 2016 went largely unpunished. It was a success for Russia to the extent that it influenced an election or was perceived to have influenced an election. And Russia probably has some structural incentives to try what they can again the next time around. The United States has to be ready for the adversary to come back.
And Maria, a question for you from our control room from executive producer Rhonda Schwartz. Rhonda?
Maria, with your project at Harvard, you're trying to advise local state officials, campaigns, what to watch out for. What is the worst case scenario? What are you trying to help them protect against?
So it's hard to say what a worst case scenario is. However, we like to look at what are the evolving threats and needs in this space. So how have officials continued to prepare and learn how they might decision make to face these attacks? One area that we believe many people are interested in learning and understanding more about are a domain which we call information operations, or what I like to call influence operations, which is the umbrella of mis and disinformation. And I will say that we saw as a project some of this happening during the night of the Iowa caucuses. It's probably a story that's not getting as much attention yet, but we definitely saw some conspiracy theories, even around our project and our work with the parties, spread into potentially, we had media sources asking, is this true? Did you develop the app, et cetera? We never tested the app. Our role was to conduct a simulation that was theoretical and allowed the parties to think through scenarios. But I think that that's something we're all still trying to understand as citizens and voters. What does mis and disinformation really look like? And then what are the systemic patterns that that some of these operations take on? I think that's an important piece for all of us to keep in mind heading into the election.
And let me follow up on that. Was there, in fact, an effort, you think, out of Russia or elsewhere to take advantage of the snafus in Iowa?
I can't say that necessarily. And I think another iteration of these threats that we're seeing is that it might be a foreign actor, it might be a domestic actor. For us, we saw it in the sense that there were some conspiracy theories on social media targeting one of our senior fellows, Robbie Mook, who was Hillary Clinton's former campaign manager, and that kind of led to this focus on if we tested the app. And so that was just one small story, but I think it's an important learning point because it's one of many stories that might have been circulating online with waiting on the results. And what's interesting is in previous election cycles, some of these mis and disinformation efforts will have also been questioning the length of results reporting. And some states, it might just take longer. So we need to know what tactics have been utilized that are intentional to sow discord, and then think twice about, is it an operational problem or is this actually an information operation going on?
And Ben Buchanan at Georgetown, you write in your book, a great book, I'm just going through it now, that there's been foreign interference in American elections before, back in 1940?
That's right. So during the Cold War, and indeed before the Cold War, the United States and Soviet Union were quite active in interfering in elections in third-party countries. But there's a lesser-known case. In 1940, the British government conducted an operation to first get Wendell Willkie, a pro-war Republican, former Democrat, nominated as the Republican to run against FDR in the summer of 1940, and then indeed throughout that election campaign and beyond to push out isolationist Republicans from office. So one of the things that's remarkable, of course, is that was an American ally, but I think it shows that there's a long history of nations interfering in each other's elections to try to benefit their own interest, which doesn't make it right.
News, huh?
Exactly right. It certainly doesn't make it right, but this is a playbook we've seen nations deploy before.
And Maria, you're seeing that already. You expect that to happen. The head of the FBI saying they can't police, they can't be the truth police.
I think it's important for us to realize that the influence tactics happening around our democratic processes are not just happening on election day. They take time to build up. They happen over time. And I think there are positive efforts underway to help states and citizens better understand that. I know the FBI talked about how it would share information with states on some of the intelligence and data that they're collecting. And I think efforts like that help us all better understand the systemic nature of these tactics versus the individual examples. We have seen as a project that for elections particularly, there are a lot of IO tactics, but for elections particularly, they'll consistently target certain things like the wrong time, the type of people that are involved, the location. And I know that there are efforts underway at the state, at the federal level with technology companies to try and help ease the flagging of those types of issues ahead of the 2020 election, which is great.
Maria Sayo Lynch at Harvard and Ben Buchanan at Georgetown, thank you both for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Up next, that deadly virus from China and the whistleblower doctor who tried to sound the alarm, now the latest victim, as questions grow about the U.S. response. It's going to get worse before it gets better. That's the word now from the World Health Organization as it struggles to contain the spread of that deadly virus that began in China, known as the coronavirus.
We don't know the source of the outbreak. We don't know what its natural reservoir is, and we don't properly understand its transmissibility or severity. To defeat this outbreak, we need answers to all those questions. And there are tools we don't have. We have no vaccine to prevent infections and no therapeutics to treat them. To put it bluntly, we're shadow boxing. We need to bring this virus out into the light so we can attack it properly.
And the World Health Organization officials also confirmed today that the Chinese doctor who was silenced after trying to blow the whistle on the coronavirus has now died after contracting the virus himself. Chinese officials first denied he had died, but now the country's People Daily newspaper has confirmed it. Joining us now to talk about this is Dr. Margaret Bordeaux, a medical doctor and international public health specialist at the Harvard Kennedy School. And doctor, let me start by asking you, is the U.S. as prepared for this virus as President Trump has maintained, especially since the Trump administration has cut funding for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and its infectious disease research?
Yeah. Well, it's certainly something that, we're concerned about, how our country is positioned to lead on this. It's just going to be something time will tell. The thing that's sort of happened that I think is unfortunate is that after the Ebola outbreaks in 2014, the issues about health and health security really got taken up by the national security community. And suddenly, health became something that was framed in terms of public safety, national security, not just a siloed issue on the side. And what was reflected in their decision making at the time was that they created a desk on the National Security Council that was just devoted to global health security. And what this administration has done has taken folks that worked on that desk and kind of spread them throughout the National Security Council under the heading of biosecurity, much more narrowly focused, perhaps on, bioterrorist threats, et cetera. And so it just hasn't had the kind of profile that we would like to see. Now, that being said, there are tremendous people in the U.S. government, at the CDC, and the Health and Human Services, at the Department of Defense, at USAID, who have really deep expertise here, and we know that they're involved in daily conversations about how to manage this. It's really just a question of if the temperature rises on this, if this becomes something that really exceeds business as usual, how is a sort of diffuse structure with no point person leading going to hold up? So that's one concern. I think the other concern that we should really note here is that funding to our state public health agencies has fallen consistently, and even in our new budgets that are being proposed, this funding for the CDC, for the global health security agenda. All of those things are slated to be cut really at the time when we are most vulnerable as a world in terms of facing emerging threats such as the new coronavirus.
So right now, is the U.S. ahead of the curve on this?
I want to be careful here. I mean, I think that the right people are talking to each other. They are in conversation with the World Health Organization. I think it is time that we start, in essence, China is giving us some time here. They're taking very aggressive measures to try to control this, and they're buying us a window where we can start to prepare for the worst. Now, hopefully, this will not be the worst. Hopefully, this will be an outbreak that is limited in some ways, is not particularly deadly, or can be contained. But we need to prepare for the worst and pray for the best, right? So we prepare for the worst. It would be nice to see, state and local agencies really coming out with messaging for the public about how to access care if they're worried, where they should call, who they should connect with. Having state public health agencies really game out with health providing agencies and hospitals. What are we going to do if significant numbers of people need respiratory support care? Which hospitals are they going to go to? Where are the respirators going to come from? Where is the health workforce going to come from? And I think we're not quite there yet in terms of those conversations, or at least what I would like to see in terms of the preparedness in that way.
All right, well, that's very troubling. Dr. Margaret Bordeaux, thank you so much for being here tonight. Very much appreciated.
Sure, pleasure.
Up next, our shout out for the investigative reporter who revealed how and why tens of thousands of motorists in Chicago have been driven into bankruptcy because of unpaid parking tickets. And our shout out tonight for an incredible series of investigative reports about what might seem like a rather mundane subject given all that's going on in the world. But these reports had real impact and made lives better for tens of thousands of people caught up in a system that thrived on the belief you can't fight City Hall. But that was a call to arms for a reporter in Chicago working for the nonprofit investigative journalism group ProPublica and its Illinois bureau. The ProPublica investigation discovered how and why tens of thousands of Chicago motorists had either lost their driver's licenses or been driven into bankruptcy because of parking tickets. Yes, parking tickets, unpaid parking tickets.
It was stunning.
But a story that at first seemed hardly exciting to reporter Melissa Sanchez of the ProPublica newsroom in Chicago.
I wasn't even convinced, my editors weren't convinced that it was going to be a significant story.
And what made the difference?
But talking to people whose lives were completely ruined by ticket debt.
People like Rachel White of Chicago, whose plight was portrayed in the ProPublica stories.
Do I put gas in my car to get to work, or do I pay this ticket? Do I pay the light bill, or do I pay this ticket? It sucks, for every time you make a little bitty mistake for there to be a dollar sign attached to it.
So you get this $200 ticket, which is a pretty big hit for a lot of working families. And when you don't pay it on time, it doubles. That's $400. And then after that, the city sends it to collections where there's more fees added on, and it grows to $488.
In the midst of me trying to get the money to afford those tickets, they would double. So if I couldn't afford it initially, how can I afford it if it doubles?
And the investigation found police often ticketing the same vehicle for the same infraction several times a week.
So one person could have easily accumulated $1,500, $2,000 in debt by just having a couple of tickets on their car in like a single week. The city goes after people in a really aggressive ways. They impound your vehicle after you accumulate as little as 2 or 3 unpaid tickets. And then they take away your driver's license. And under Rahm Emanuel's administration a few years back, the city really took that to a new level, and they suspended more driver's licenses than they had in years prior.
And Melissa Sanchez discovered tens of thousands of Chicagoans actually had to file for bankruptcy as a way to relieve the debt and get their driver's licenses back.
I talked to a woman who had $100,000 in ticket debt. And they couldn't pay for it, but they really needed their licenses to drive, and they couldn't afford to get on the city payment plans to be able to start that process to reinstate their licenses. And the only legal option that they could afford was filing for Chapter 13 bankruptcy.
Forced into bankruptcy over parking tickets.
Exactly.
And then, working with Chicago radio station WBEZ, ProPublica tracked tens of thousands of the tickets and discovered they were being written mostly in primarily African American neighborhoods.
And that let us say more definitively, police are issuing more tickets, a disproportionate share of tickets in the south and west sides of Chicago, where there's more low-income Black families living.
Whenever you wake up in the morning and you know there's a possibility of getting your car towed, you feel like a criminal. You feel like a piece of yourself is going to be gone, you know, because yes, it's just a car, but it's my car.
But it took a year-and-a-half-long series of stories to get City Hall and then Mayor Rahm Emanuel to acknowledge the problem, she says.
It wasn't until a few weeks before he ultimately left office that he publicly acknowledged, yes, there might be a problem and we will work to fix it.
But now the reporting is having a major impact. Chicago's new mayor, Lori Lightfoot, says she was outraged by the findings.
This is way more than just about ticket debt. This is about restoring people's dignity. This is about being able to provide for your family. This is about giving people a real chance to get to work and keep a job.
And just last month, the Illinois governor signed legislation that would restore the driver's licenses of some 55,000 people.
Tens of thousands of motorists in the state can now have their driving privileges reinstated. Governor J.B. Pritzker just signed a law eliminating suspensions for most non-moving violations.
It feels really good. And I hear it every day from the people who call me. I never worked on something that had this much impact.
Nice to know you can fight City Hall. That's our program for tonight. We'll see you back here next week.